Hi, I'm Sulaiman, and I'm as bothered as every African on the continent about the pandemic. What scientists and researchers are trying to unravel is to see the new strain and how little this has been, and of course, what we'll be doing as we get the vaccine. Welcome to VSA. It's a worry for many Africans across the continent. Of course, Africa has reported over 3 million COVID-19 cases in almost a year. Now, the continent has seen the demise of almost 80,000 people within the same period, while more than 2.7 million people have recovered. Now, Africa's case fatality rate stands at 2.4%. That's at least 2 persons have died in every 100 cases of COVID-19 on the continent. Not too good a story. South Africa has Africa's highest case total at over 1 million, which is specifically, I think, about 1,346,936, with more than 37,000 deaths. Western Sahara has the lowest numbers of fatalities at 4, yet the highest case fatality rate at 11.8%. Now, many African countries have expressed interest in vaccines, with affordability and logistics proving to be a snag. So far, Morocco, Guinea, South Africa, Egypt, Kenya, and just recently Nigeria are finalizing plans to procure vaccines for their citizens. As the numbers rise on the continent, it coincides with one of the worst food crises bedeviling Africa at the moment, and this makes recovery tougher in every ramification. Joining me today on VSA, Dr Damaris Matoke. She's the Deputy Director of Kenya Medical Research Institute, KEMRI, and of course Dr Peter Imoesi, who's a Research Fellow, University of Aberdeen, Scotland. Ladies and gentlemen, good to have both of you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Matoke, we must say thanks for joining us because, well, we understand the time difference between Nigeria and Kenya. But let's quickly look at what this is about. You are a biomedical research scientist, Dr. Matoke, specializing in molecular biology. And of course, one other beautiful thing that we should be looking at this moment is your following of this virus when it first appeared on the continent. Tell us what you have seen so far.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here, to be able to highlight the work that we've been doing concerning response to COVID-19. There's a lot that we've been doing, amongst them trying to understand the virus from looking at its genetics, the variation in its makeup as far as genetics is concerned. And also we've been trying to understand how it affects the human body, who's the host to the virus, looking at the immunity, looking at responses as far as when one is infected. And also we've been trying to understand or develop kits that can be used for diagnosis, which will be cheaper and available within the continent, because most of the time we've been importing from out there. And the other factors we've been looking at, what other factors are contributing to transmission and how we are transmitting from one another, and other control measures that can be put in place. Those are amongst the areas that we've been looking at, and what is the role of the environment in transmission of the disease. Yes.
Well, I think that's an exciting one. The good thing here is that both of you are researchers following the trend, and Africa greatly rely on your expertise, your knowledge, and input in getting out of this mess. Let me bring in Dr. Peter Imoesi in here. Peter, if there are unidentified variants of SARS-CoV-2 virus in Kenya and Nigeria, or on the continent, what is the possibility that the vaccine would work? since based on the continuous mutation of the virus genome?
Thank you for having me, Sulaiman. And just a quick credit to your guest. I'm quite impressed with what Kenya actually doing from what she just said on the angle of research. And this is the first time I'm really hearing details about the research that is ongoing in Africa, apart from the one we hear from South Africa. So that's really good to hear such innovation and platforms ongoing. Now back to your question as regards to the possibility of possible variants yet to be identified, let's say in Kenya, Nigeria, or majority of the Africa country, if the vaccine is going to work. So in clear terms, as the last time I checked, the UK has done over 140,000 sequencing of this particular virus, which is a SARS-CoV-2. From the data we had at the time, I think Nigeria, we've barely done close to 20, but I'm not sure we've done 50 yet. So the reason for genomic sequencing or surveillance is for you to understand the possible variants you have already in the population. And based on these variants, you could then check if the particular vaccine you have, because we have several vaccines, like for instance, the Moderna, the Pfizer, and the Oxford AstraZeneca, they are literally targeting the spike protein. So what we do currently in the UK is to sequence these variants, possible variants, and check the efficacy of the current vaccine that is already approved to check if it's going to be effective going forward. But if you look at that in Nigeria, for instance, or in Kenya, since we've not identified so many variants yet, it's not because the variants are not there, it's just the fact that our research harm of this pandemic is really poor. And based on that, the chances that there are variants that may or may likely have changed the spike protein is there. And if that is a possibility, it may be difficult to tell for now, but this is just an hypothesis, right? So if the spike protein is changed, for instance, with possible variants yet to be identified in Africa, some of these vaccines that are actually targeting the spike protein may not be effective. The stress here is may not be effective until we have the real scientific data, which is evidence-based data, to ascertain for sure what are the variants in Nigeria and what are the variants in Kenya and across all Africa country. And the reason for this arm of research is, you know fully well that when it comes to adhering to the non-pharmaceutical interventions, social distancing, physical distancing as well, we are not really staying put on those measures, basically. And that gives rise to the virus being able to breed and mutate continuously. Remember in the early days, I think December last year, I was on this program where we're discussing about the B117. And from the report we had at the time, we're told that that particular variant that we have now emerged from an individual that had a chronic disease. So what that means is the virus stayed a longer period in that individual. When you compare that with the cases you have in Nigeria, for instance, where there is no physical distancing, no social distancing, everyone is doing what they like a normal environment. Mm-hmm. What you're helping the virus to do is to mutate continuously. And this mutation basically will give rise to a particular variant that may not that this particular vaccine may not be effective against. So that is where we are right now.
Let me bring in Dr. Damaris in here quickly to weigh in. You know, when we talk about mutation, perhaps see how you can best and succinctly break it down for the for ease of understanding for the African watching now. How does this move? Given that you have been in the laboratory studying the movement of this virus.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And thanks, Peter, for also highlighting on the various mutations that we have had in Africa and beyond. So to go specifically to the question about what we are seeing, I want to break it down to a layman's language in a way that when we talk about gene mutations, first of all, there's that which is known, like what was discovered from China, and they know this is the, we call it the sequence. This is what we expect the virus to look like. So anything different from that, and this is about the genetic makeup of that virus. Anything, any change, any slight change of that, we call it a mutation, because there's changes either on nucleotide basis or in changes in the structure, changes on like I can say, the genetic makeup of that virus. So in Africa, it's known always that viruses mutate a lot. You find there's high variability, be it not only the COVID or the SARS-CoV-2, but many other viruses. Always we find mutations, even for HIV and other flu-like viruses. So for the concern for COVID-19 is that if there's change of the genetic makeup, be it the spike proteins that my colleague was talking about, will that mean that, yes, are we getting a super virus which cannot respond to treatment, which we need to act differently? So what we are seeing at the moment is this. Yes, there is changes in the genetic makeup of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, but we want to ascertain that, does that change mean change in the entire management or treatment system, change in the vaccine that is being developed? And if it's just slight changes which do really not affect treatment or management or vaccine, then we will be okay. But there's always, we need to keep on doing what we call a surveillance. We need to keep on doing genomes, sequencing the genomes, coming up with genomes, not only in Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa, but the entire African continent, so that we understand the fact that we know that viruses mutate a lot, so that we are able to understand that will a mutation of a certain level indicate. So that's why research is there, and that's the importance of us to keep on doing whole genome sequencing, getting to see the genetic makeup or the genetic structure of this virus, so that it can advise on treatment regimes, it can advise on the vaccine, or it can advise on any other management system that we have.
Now that Dr. Damaris has taken it down into a better understanding level for everyone, let me bring in Peter here. When you take a look, through your microscope, looking at the virus, the picture we see, is that what exactly it looks like? Because it looks ugly and scary. Perhaps if only the ordinary eye can see, maybe everyone would have been more careful.
That was quite funny, right? So the picture you see in the media, which is the ball and the kind of spike around it, that is what you see on the microscope. So that is a true representation of what the SARS-CoV-2 virus represents. So just to be clear, this is not the first SARS virus. So you have SARS-CoV-1. Now you have SARS-CoV-2. So there are studies before that we've studied in depth what SARS-CoV-1 is all about. So it's more like we're taking this one step further, or the virus has learned new way to get into human all over again using a different strain. So the SARS-CoV-2 is a strain. And when you look at this particular virus, right? So the virus itself is new when it comes to the variant. So when it comes to the strain, but when it comes to the variant, this coronavirus altogether is not really new, because you have 6 coronaviruses before now. So this is the 7th, I think, the 7th coronavirus we have currently. So when you look at this virus, the genome itself, like my colleague explained, is what represents what the virus is. Like the beautiful picture you have behind you, which is Village Square, Africa. So the way the virus works is this: just delete F from your Africa, you have Arica. Then it means that if you've designed something to be compatible with those letters before, because the F is missing, whatever compatibility you were designing initially will not fit clearly. And a good example again is your tie and your neck inside. So if we alter the shape of your tie and your long sleeve, most likely the fitting will be lost completely.
So in other words, the virus is a disruptor.
Yes, yes. So that's what is going on right now. So when you have these mutations ongoing, you are basically kind of disrupting the genomic sequence. So the genomic sequence is the same thing as what you have alphabet. So in this regard, I would say A, B, C, D. But in molecular biology, we have 4 alphabets for this particular genome when it comes to the DNA. So for every single word you write, it represents something. So for the spike protein, it has a specific A, B, C, D alphabet, but not, this is just layman terms, right? So you have a specific A, B, C, D alphabet. Now, if there's any change in this A, B, C, D, for instance, with the B117 we have currently, we have that in that same variant. So the B11, let me explain this clearly.
Go ahead.
The B11, there are several mutations in that B11. An example of such is the 6970 deletion. So what that means is that at a particular line in that particular spike protein, there's a deletion of a particular sequence that is called amino acid. So amino acid is what built up to give you a protein. So a classic example of protein, for instance, is my finger. So all this flesh you see are proteins, and they are built up from amino acid. And from your amino acid, you have your RNAs. From your RNAs, you have your DNA. That is called molecular biology. So that's what the virus is all about. So once you have this deletion continuously or replication of this particular virus, you're creating a new organism. So this particular SARS-CoV-2 is a new organism altogether. So basically, for us to understand the behavioral pattern of this virus, we have to go into the genomic system, that's the entire working system of this virus, to know clearly what the virus is all about. And from there, we could create medical interventions like you have the vaccine ongoing, or any other therapeutics that is currently being developed, like the remdesivir and the Rejuvenor, the drug that was given to, I think, Donald Trump in the early days when he had his COVID.
Let me go to Kenya, where Dr. Damaris is listening to Peter in Aberdeen. What comes to mind is that you and your colleagues have never for one day taking a break. If this is not the first time we're having, SARS-CoV, they are in numbers, it then means you've been studying, the mutation and how it's been going. So given the case fatality rate now on the continent, which is low, many African countries have experienced some sort of low fatality. So what sort of research should we be engaged in to decipher the reason or reasons for the low fatality or asymptomatic or mild cases on the continent?
Yes, since March 12th, when the first case was reported in Kenya, scientists in KEMRI and other institutions within Kenya have actually been working around the clock. And I can specifically speak to our team that has been trying to understand the virus from various angles. One of them, I could say that it has taught us a lot since we had this disease. And even doing genomics work, as I said, but we've looked broadly into even trying to understand if there's a possibility of us coming up with our own vaccine that can be that has been developed within Africa and Kenya in particular, and also that can be used in the African population. If you remember, initially there was the myth about vaccines that have been developed out there that are being tested, that will be to be tested in Africa. And there was an outcry when a statement that was made that Africa should not be used as guinea pigs. So there's a lot that needs, remember COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 is a new virus, yeah? So, yes, people talking about Africa mortality is been low. Amongst them, they have attributed that we are not testing enough. But if people are dying from COVID, we could be, if they were dying in numbers, then we'll be having a lot of outcry out there. So there's a lot that needs to be done in order to understand this virus. Maybe I can list a few of these areas that we need to. We need to understand what role does the climate change or environment play in propagation of this virus. first of all? Do we have any special climatic conditions that are attributing to how the virus multiplies in the environment and also in the host? The other research that needs to be done is the immunity. How is the immunity of the African population? Among them, looking at how do we respond, because we are having high number of cases that are symptomatic. People who are tested say they're positive, but you can't see clinical. There's no any clinical presentation. They are neither, they don't have fever. They are neither coughing. They are okay. So we need to do a lot of study to look at the immunity, look at antibody antigen response. The other study that needs to be done is to look at, especially for that, the asymptomatic cases. Is there a possibility of these asymptomatic cases transmitted? Do they transmit to other hosts in a way that if I'm seated around someone who's asymptomatic, and for sure I'm negative of COVID, will I contract the disease from the person who's asymptomatic? Those things need to be understood. And more so, there is need for us to do a lot of genomics work. Genomics and the fact that Peter was talking about deletions and other mutations. We need to look at keenly that maybe African population have been exposed to similar viruses before in a way that we didn't catch it, or they've been exposed to similar family of viruses, because we know coronaviruses are there, and though they affect I could say the wild animals in the forest and others, but we should be able to look at that. Did we get exposure somehow before? So those are the things that needs to be looked at by looking at exposure levels and looking at what that one did to our immunity. But above everything, we need to appreciate that within African population, we are sparsely populated. The level of urbanization in African countries is not as high as it is in the US and in Europe and other places. So there's a probability that the way we are either spread or scattered across, and here I'm not talking about the cities in African countries, here I'm talking about the outcasts outside the cities within African countries. So there you find that transmission is quite low and people who are affected from the disease are very few. So there's something to do with that sparse population out there that could also be contributing to the level of contracting the disease or even dying from the disease. So there's a lot of research that needs to be, even developing our own vaccines, as I talked about.
Yeah, we'll speak pretty much more on that when we come back after now, talk more about the possibility of Africa developing its own vaccine that will work for its people. And of course, asking the question if Africa has actually responded quickly, swiftly, and rightly so, and what Africa is also doing in terms of funding such research as what you both have been doing. That's when we return. A big concern for the continent, and that's why here on VSA we have continued to stay on the issue of COVID-19. Just when cases have skyrocketed and deaths are increasing, the Nigerian government, for instance, has decided to open schools. University undergraduates who have been at home for almost a year will resume, and the threats of the pandemic are much more palpable. National orientation camps in the country are still open, yet there is a raging number of cases on a daily basis. Ghana, who have coped relatively till now, is saying the numbers are getting out of hand and a lockdown may be imminent. And in South Africa, Malawi, Tunisia, and many others, they are on a partial lockdown. The Nigerian government may be considering the same move now. But the thing is, the researchers have been talking, so that the governments of different African countries can wake up and act much more swiftly. Today on the program, I'm still being joined by two African researchers, Dr. Damaris Matoke and of course Dr. Peter Imoesi. Good to have both of you still there with us. Let me start off with Dr. Imoesi. From a research perspective, what are your fears as regard the virus and the vaccine?
So just to buttress what my colleague just said just a while ago, I'm really impressed with the kind of research that is actually ongoing in Kenya. Like when I say I'm impressed, I'm really impressed. And a few highlights from what she said. Number one is she was talking about immunity. If you could recall, recently there was a news on your platform where there was a study that was done in the UK here, where they said people that were exposed to this particular current coronavirus had immunity that lasted for up to 6 months. And that level of immunity is the same with the vaccine itself. And if you listen to her clearly, you could hear her trying to explain the antibody studies. So what that implies is, what you can deduce from my explanation is the fact that overexposure to this virus will create that immunity you're looking for. And that was what that study did actually. So those people had continuous exposure. So if Africans are not adhering to the non-pharmaceutical interventions, it implies that there is continuous exposure, infection, and reinfection. So if you have a mild case or you're asymptomatic, that will give you a level of immunity. It will not be so strong. But continuous exposure will then lead to more immunity being developed. But we can't say for sure because there's no research to back up this. And that is where research comes in. And I'm really glad that you have two people who are in research trying to dig deep into these areas. Another highlight she said again was previous exposure to coronaviruses. So let's look at Nigeria, for instance. If you go down to the northern part of Nigeria from NCDC data, you will see clearly that the cases that are being reported in the northern part of Nigeria are not the same in the west and in the south. And if you look at again from our statements, she made reference to climatic condition. Of course, you know that the northern part of Nigeria is different from the southern part of Nigeria and the western part of Nigeria. So you could say, okay, is there a climatic difference that has to that have a way of infecting or minimizing the rate of infection? That is where research comes into play again. When she said there are other previous coronaviruses, yes, there are. When she said again, if there is possibility of exposure, yes, there is. For instance, the MERS is another coronavirus that belongs to the current corona family we have. So this coronavirus belongs to beta coronaviruses. So in beta coronaviruses, you then have SARS, you have the MERS, then you have other listed coronaviruses again. Example of where you can get this virus, one is cattle. Again, what is the major occupation in the northern part of Nigeria? Nomadic farming. So you have a clue there. Again, when it comes to the northern part of Nigeria, you have camels, you have donkey. So could it be that our association with these animals over time has given us the immunity we're looking for that we don't know yet? That is research for you. Again, there was a paper that was published in Nature last year, I think sometime in September, October. They said that people that were exposed to SARS-CoV-1 had antibody immunity and B cells. So the B cells are the cells that are responsible for the production of antibody for when you have subsequent reinfection. So you can see that if actually Africans really go through research, we may likely unlock the real scenario of what is playing out. I give credit to the medical doctors, right? But when it comes to this particular pandemic, you need scientists on the front line to actually help to understand what exactly is going on, why the medical doctors will go in to treat the patient basically. Now, do I have fears about the virus and the vaccine? As a scientist, I've looked at the data, right, when it comes to the vaccine, like the Moderna, I've seen the data myself. For the Pfizer, I've seen the data myself. For the Oxford AstraZeneca, I've seen the data myself. So I have no fear about what the science is. But like you know already, for every new product, there are bound to be updates here and there. There are bound to be issues where you need to study what is going on exactly. So since this is the first time we're going to be administering the vaccine to people, we do not really know what to expect. And a case example is where the Pfizer, when initially it was administered to people, people came down with allergy. With allergy, of course, you have drugs to treat such reactions, basically. So that is where you will have continuous research ongoing. Again, like I said in your program a little while ago, I was saying that also for this particular vaccine, because we do not have enough safety data yet, that's why they are saying that if you're pregnant or you're breastfeeding or you intend to get pregnant, you shouldn't go for this particular vaccine that is ongoing right now. And my fear now is this. In the West, where I am, we have the capacity, we have the human resources, we have the experts to actually keep tab of the research as we vaccinate the population. So as we are vaccinating the population, for instance, we are taking in their data, their phone number, their addresses. There is a form you fill in online. And there's another form again that you are given to always, I think in the first 21 days, to report step by step any sudden reaction at all. Again, in Africa, there's a fear in Africa. Do we have a robust system to monitor people going forward once you vaccinate them? Any drug at all is risky. So if you take high dose of paracetamol, for instance, if that's your first time of taking it, you may react. A child that is just born today, if you give that child paracetamol, for instance, he or she will react because it's a new drug into that child's system. But that doesn't mean that paracetamol is, is toxic or to human, basically, because this is drug that has been around for a long period of time. But because this is a new vaccine, we need to start amassing data for a long period of time. So are Africans ready to have a strong database of individuals that will get this vaccine and monitor them for 5-10 years? I'll give you another example before I round up. Basically, there's a study that is ongoing here in the University of Aberdeen where we are trying to study the brains of people of over 50 years ago. So we have this particular brain database where we have these brain samples. Basically, we're trying to check a correlation between the link of that particular generation, I think it's the 50th generation, in the 50s, to check the possibility of diseases such as Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson to their current generation. So you could see how long UK are actually interested in research. 50 years. I was not even born when this research started about 50 years ago. And here I am in this same research where we're trying to understand what exactly is going on. So for the UK here, for instance, when it comes to this vaccine, I won't be surprised that 10, 20, 50 years down the line, they will have data to actually understand the implication of this vaccine among their population. And that is where Africans should sit tight, push in their very best scientists in the forefront in the fight against this particular pandemic.
I think you've just raised a very fine one. I think a quick one here. I'm excited that both of you are here, researchers. I think many thanks to Dr. Damaris for obliging to be on the show. So the moment she agreed to be on the show, I said, we must bring Dr. Peter back again. Let's start trying to understand what exactly this is about so that the continent can be free. Now, Dr. Damaris, you know, the mutations are top on Africa's problems now. How has the virus mutated? And is this very lethal?
Yeah, thanks. Mutations. I think one of the things we have to accept, yes, the virus has mutated. The fact that we are reporting strains in Nigeria, we are reporting new strains in South Africa, and many other countries, I'm sure very soon will. That actually shows us that the virus is doing what it's known to do, because viruses are known to be doing that. So it's not, I can't say it's very little, it's a yes and a no. It's because not many countries are currently doing genome sequencing. And not many countries are actually in that front of reporting what genomes that they are able to capture in their various countries. So I could say so far, it could be, yes, we have Nigeria, South Africa, and a few African countries reporting mutations of the virus. including Kenya. But we could also say it's not because it's that little. It could be more, but not most African countries are not doing it. It's important that all countries come to the forefront to do mutation, to monitor the genetic structure of this virus and how it's changing over time, because this, as I said earlier, will guide us on how we are responding to this virus as far as treatment is concerned. And as Peter said, is that even a small gene deletion or an amino acid change means something else as far as the virus is concerned. The fact that we are reporting mutations, it shows that we are only scratching the surface. There could be more into it, or for sure the mutations are that few. So that's the research that is needed in all countries in Africa where the virus has been reported. There's need to monitor those changes in the genome of the virus.
For both of you, but I'll take this to Peter now. You know, as one who's been a part of the development of vaccines, what would you advise, African governments to do before procuring these vaccines?
So before we go ahead to procure these vaccines, first you have to consider your logistics. Do you have the required tools to kind of store the particular vaccine you're going for? I think yesterday I heard in the news that Nigeria is actually going for the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine. I think the first 100,000 doses coming from Pfizer. And I think a little while ago I saw a state in Nigeria where they've taken delivery of the cold chain system, the -80 freezers, which is really good. So if you are going for a vaccine, finally, for me, my preference will be, I'm not trying to market anyone here, basically, but my preference will be the Oxford AstraZeneca. And the next is going to be Johnson & Johnson, because these vaccines are stored within 2 to 8 degrees, which is really low temperature, which is normal fridge you have in your office right there. And that system will be much easier for African countries, Nigeria inclusive. Again, in the US, for instance, we are aware that it's difficult to move the Pfizer vaccine to interior areas in the US. So if an advanced economy like the US is having issues when it comes to storage, how much more countries in Africa like Rwanda, Nigeria, Kenya, and the rest. So if we're going for vaccine, we have to put the storage aspect into context. Again, as a scientist, if you're going for vaccine, again, the first priority is going to be what is the science behind this vaccine? When I say the science is, have you done a thorough preclinical trial? After the preclinical trial, have you gone ahead to do the phase 1? And have you made your data available to a reputed journal in the world where you have scientists weighing in to cross-examine your results? Then have you gone on to do a thorough clinical trial phase 2? Then have you made those data available as well for the world and in a reputed journal for scientists to look in again to say, you know what, we think what you're doing is right? Then the last phase, which is the clinical trial phase 3, have you done the same thing as well? Now, these are the criteria I'll be looking at before going for any vaccine. And just for you to know as well, the 3 vaccines that have gone ahead to do this currently is the Oxford AstraZeneca, the Pfizer vaccine, and the Moderna. So these 3 vaccines I mentioned, they've actually published their data in the New England Journal of Medicine. That's for the mRNA virus, which is the Moderna and the Pfizer. Then Oxford AstraZeneca have gone ahead to publish their data as well on the Lancet Journal. Now, these 2 journals I mentioned, they are top ranked and well-rated journal in the world. So if those journals are accepted to publish those data, so what that means is that scientists around the world have peer-reviewed those results. So what that means is you're going to send the data to an anonymous individual who is a scientist and who is an expert in that field. He or she will then review those data, give his or our own remark, and based on that, the editor will then say, okay, you know what, we're going to publish. But if there is any issues that require clarification, like the Oxford AstraZeneca initially, they have to regime treatments where there were a little bit confusion here and there. That is when they were asked to go ahead to examine, to explain to the reviewers what this result means. So that's where you have a kind of a filter that helps you to check if there is any anomaly with your data. But if there is no vaccine, so if you're going for a vaccine in Africa or in Nigeria, ensure that the vaccine has their data published in a reputed journal. I'll say that again. If you're going for a vaccine in Nigeria or in Africa, ensure that the vaccine you're going for, they have their data already published in a reputed journal where you have the safety data as well published. So if there's any vaccine that is still currently under clinical trial phase 3, do not go for that vaccine for the time being until that particular vaccine has gone on to publish that data in a reputed journal as well.
Well, I think listening to both of you, one thing comes to mind. Africa may need a common reaction to issues to fight the pandemic as one united front. Dr. Damaris, apologies, we lost you for a bit there. But again, glad to know you're back. Tourism, has been hit hard by the pandemic with nations counting their losses. But with adequate research, I'm quite sure the continent will be able to recover. For instance, with the 2021 economic recovery looking seemingly impossible and the pandemic changing the realities of the modern times, how to survive becomes an important question. So, speaking on research funding in Africa and how this can play a role in subsequent or possible pandemic or endemic diseases is very, very key here. For instance, in parts of Nigeria where the fight is on Lassa fever and a couple of other issues. Now, Dr. Damaris, you're a director at the Kenya Medical Research Institute. Tell us how this is going for you so that we can better understand what the continent is dealing with in terms of research and funding.
Yeah, I think COVID has taught us a lot as the African continent. Among us, this is that, which something I can say here is that Africa needs to own its own issues of health. One of the things is that when COVID started in Africa, okay, maybe in Kenya, I could say specifically, you realize from testing, getting the testing kits and even the platforms, we were struggling to get these platforms in place to be able to test, trying to import kits that could be used for the PCR, real-time PCR, that is the confirmatory test being used to test COVID-19. So the most important thing is African owning issues or addressing its own health issues by setting the health research agenda and also trying to set aside, we could say, set aside funding or set aside resources that go towards its own research, not only for COVID-19, but for every other diseases. And that's why I'm talking about health. The part we've gotten used to in Africa is trying to equip the health facilities. And we end up forgetting the part that is very critical, which is research. Because why should Africa be buying diagnostic kits? If we developed our own, as I said earlier, it would be cheaper, the kits would be available. Africa, if it set aside money for development of drugs and put in infrastructure, they're putting money aside to do research, but also putting in infrastructure, which from the beginning of trying to do basic science research to a point of developing a product that goes to the market, we set up infrastructure that accommodates that. And also Africa needs to build its human resource capacity, skilled labor. We have people who are very brilliant within African continent, but these brilliant people are the ones that mostly the West, and Peter, you're in the West now because you're very brilliant. I wish Peter was in the African region to do his research within the African continent. We have that human resource that as over time, who are very brilliant, who have been taken to the West. and are able to develop those kits, are able to develop the vaccines, drugs, and then Africa buys them expensively from the West. So if African governments are serious about addressing health, they need to make it a priority. They need to set aside funding. They need to build infrastructure from the labs to the factories or manufacturing companies. They need to work closely with their private organizations within the countries so that they can build capacity as far as diagnosis, treatment, and others is concerned. And also African countries need to speak to each other. We tend to speak more to the West than me speaking to my close neighbor, Tanzania, government speaking to. I rather talk to someone in the US, a leader in the US, than speaking to the leader in my closest neighbor, Eastern African countries. So African leaders or governments need to speak among us themselves, tap into the resources that we have as a continent, and try to borrow from each other than going to the West and other countries in the East, Asia, and others. So that strength needs to be done. And also that human skill, as I said, we need to avoid that brain drain, whereby our brilliant people, we export them to other countries. That's denying us the opportunity to utilize them or for them to be innovative. And this is the part I need to mention, that African governments need to invest in innovation, for research innovations for any other products that we develop. I want to give an example here. At times we have partners. I won't say that it's bad to have partners from the West or any other places, because that's how we get to strengthen ourselves or build capacity amongst ourselves. But you find if we wanted to work on a drug development, you find Africa will do the basic research. So when it gets to a point, it's becoming a product, that part is done in the West. So that product will come from the West as an end product, and Africa will buy it very expensive from the West. But if African countries can now stop that, invest from beginning to the end, then we'll have a rich continent and disease-free or disease-managed continent.
Well, that's the whole essence while we're here on Village Square Africa here on News Central. I'd like Peter to weigh in on this before we go.
My colleague has actually elaborated brilliantly as regards to research and development. And I would say thanks for the compliment as well. Just to put this in perspective, so my bachelor degree was right there in Nigeria. Then I moved over to England on self-sponsorship for my master's degree in molecular biology. Then I returned back to Nigeria. My PhD degree, I got a scholarship from the University of Aberdeen. That is what, I think in pounds, it was £51,000. In Naira, at today's exchange rate, that's 30 million Naira, over 30 million Naira. That's just my tuition fee. So my research consumables is not included. My living expenses is not included. So in total, maybe my PhD will worth about 17 million Naira in Nigeria. That is a foreign university on a foreign student. Today, here I am doing research for the University of Aberdeen after my PhD. That is a society that value research. That is a society that value human capacity development. That is a society that knows the place of research when it comes to the economy. So for instance, I'm being paid my salary monthly. As you know already, the tax system in the UK is killing. So despite I'm working for the university, in a way, I'm contributing to the UK economy through the tax system, through the housing system, because of course I have to stay under a roof, then someone I need to pay. That means that whoever owns where I'm living, which is a UK citizen, for instance, I'm actually helping that individual. I need to feed. Again, I'm helping to move the economy. So you could say that science, for me, I would say is a new oil well in the 21st century. So if you want to really move at fast speed, you need to actually invest in science. And like you said earlier, we are actually buying the end product. So the supply chain, you need to actually start from the very beginning. So if, for instance, you need reagent, for instance, someone else will have to create the plastic. That is you giving a job to someone who is in plastic industry. Someone else will have to design the labels. That is you giving a job to somebody in the printing industry. Someone else will have to do packaging.
So it's a long chain.
Yes. So the government needs to go back and say, you know what? Research is actually real business.
Absolutely.
Let's get down to it.
Well, it's a fine place for us to anchor this today. I still think that we haven't actually scratched the surface listening to both of you. And if you would oblige me, even I'm doing this outside my producer, if we can continue this tomorrow, is that a deal?
The ladies first.
Dr. Damaris, can we continue this tomorrow?
Peter, what do you think?
All right, let's go for it.
I like to thank both of you honestly for doing this for the continent. The continent needs both of you and pretty much more outside, even outside the continent. Let's see how we can salvage the situation. Hard times, absolutely, but these times are also surmountable. Listening to both of you, the best response in the continent now has to be leadership, as both of you have highlighted in your closing remark. From the smallest unit of the society, the family, to the national leadership, these are critical periods, and message remains the same: stay safe, save others. Thanks for being such a nice company again, Dr. Damaris Matoke and Dr. Peter Imoesi. Don't forget that we have a date tomorrow. I'm Sulaiman again. I'll see you tomorrow.